This is a book review, or two book reviews, but I'm combining them. One was from my local library, which is The Book of Tomorrow, and the other is, which is from my home collection, is The End of Mr. Y. And the reason why I'm doing them both together is because I wanted to make a comparison between the two. The first book, The Book of Tomorrow, is about a character called Tamara, and her world is turned upside down because she has to leave the city and go and live in the countryside. And a travelling library comes to her village, which brings a mysterious leather-bound book, locked with a gold clasp and padlock, which Tamara discovers within its pages takes her breath away, and everything starts to change in the most unexpected ways for her. In The End of Mr. Y, by Scarlett Thomas, the character Ariel, she discovers a copy of a book in a second-hand bookshop, and she can't believe her eyes because she knows enough about that particular author, a scientist, and she thinks, or some people think, the book is cursed. But what she finds herself is swept in adventures of love, sex, death, and time travel. My thoughts about the main characters were they both irritated me. Tamara because of her attitude, in the way she hurt people's feelings, and Ariel because of her ego. She really did think throughout the whole book that she was just sexualized gift to men due to her body and red hair. And throughout the books, both of them, neither of them in the main character, let you forget about these intricacies about themselves. And the book's reading styles are slow-paced, and that's due to the fact that the subplots within the stories. The Book of Tomorrow is because there's no warning when it skips to the diary entries. I mean, it just continues straight. There's no dates that tells you she's writing in that particular time frame. And in the End of Mr. Y, it's because there's a heavy element of scientific theories within it. And although I would say the descriptions of both books are very well constructed, and both books end on cliches, which I did find very disappointing. But on a special note, there was good humour in places, which I did laugh out loud. I'm still chuckling as I remember them. In The Book of Tomorrow, it's when Tamara gives the character of Anana Mills and Boon's book called Bedded by the Turkish Billionaire, and she declares it's one of the Mills and Boon's greats, and it must have been because it ends up doing the rounds in the convent. And the humour in the book of End of Mr. Y is when Adam is laid siege to in the church, and admits after the two villains of the book have left that location that he ends up shaking so much that when he eventually gets up and out of his hiding place, he drinks all the communion wine, and he says, "I ain't so brave." And the link between the books, both characters are searching for something that's missing in their lives. Both books deal with a spiritual, supernatural element within their lives. Both books' characters have to deal with virtues and vices. In the Book of Tomorrow, it's about lies, and then in the book of The End of Mr. Y, it's about truth. Both books deal with also the infliction of words, rather than their empowerment of words. In the Book of Tomorrow, it deals with the thoughts from speech, and the End of Mr. Y, in that book, it deals with the thoughts from the written word. And both books, I felt, were dealing with something beyond themselves. Ultimately, they had and were facing choices. In the Book of Tomorrow, it was a matter of chance, faith, the possibility of understanding, from which that of a personal perception, that was the matter of what she actually thought. And in regards to the end of Mr. Y, it was a matter of risk, rationale, and the possibility of being understood from that of a social perception, which is what mattered what other people thought. Well, how does that leave the reader and the impression it made on the reader? In the Book of Tomorrow, the interest lay in the apparent paradox, the basis of which lies in the difference between the nature of our experiences and our knowledge of how those experiences are caused. In the book of The End of Mr. Y, it's about the conflict between our everyday life experiences of objects and an analysis of how these experiences came to exist. It looks to inquire about the human being that creates a coherent perceptual world out of a maze of physical impingements. That's from the reader's perspective and perception from both books. It's about our experiences which depend upon our active role as readers, rather than being passive, as played out as a perceiver, who, in terms of the influence that is set and our expectations, is to achieve a structure from the books, from what maybe be ambiguous or withheld from us as a reader. In the end of Mr. Y, it was withheld from us. We just didn't know at all. And in terms of the Book of Tomorrow, it was ambiguous, because the text just ran on with no breaks. And this is because our world of experiences has stability in the consistencies of perception, which bears some relation to external events. In other words, the perceptional act can be said to generate understanding that we can use as a basis for action. The connotation of meaningful here is that structure and stability are possibly necessary for meaning to exist. So the role of the perceiver, as we are as readers, is in effect the perceptions of people, their behaviour, and the context, and how these are interpreted, which may differ, as in what is being paid attention to, and how they are labelled, and the categories, and how they relate to what we have observed, and what inferences we can draw from the person, behaviour, or situation. And these books cover that in how they are constructed. You gain that kind of concept from reading these books from it, because in the Book of Tomorrow it's from a philosophical perspective, whilst in the book The End of Mr. Y it was from a psychologist's perspective, as both these professions have been intrigued with the nature of human perceptual processes. And given in this way from the books, I'll give two examples. In the Book of Tomorrow, it's on page 417, and she says, "I constantly wonder how much my life I would have learnt if it hadn't been for the book. Sometimes I think I would have found out sooner or later. Most of the time I think what the book's purpose was, because it certainly had a purpose. It led me here. It helped me to discover the secrets that made me a better person." And in the book The End of Mr. Y on pages 8, 16 and 18, I'll paraphrase some of it, it says, "And I read the opening lines of the preface, first in my head and then out loud as another train rattles along outside. And it says, the discourse which follows may appear to the reader as mere fancy or as a dream, penned on waking. In those fevered moments one is still memorized by those conjuring tricks that are produced in the mind once the eyes are closed, as most of the ideas were about the development of and nature of thought, specifically scientific thought, and he, Loomis, often described his fictional works as experiments of the mind. That is basically what both the books have in their concepts, is that one is curious about their contact with the outside world and wonder how their experiences are caused and to what degree they reflect the world accurately. One is the nature of our experiences, and the other is our knowledge of how those experiences are caused. And there are two questions that are posed within the books near the end. And I'm not giving anything away when I say these two questions. How do you dispose of a book once you've read it? And that's asked in the Book of Tomorrow. And in the book of The End of Mr. Y, it is asked, what would happen if those who read my book not only discover, but find some way to alter it? What say I or you? I say,